The good old minimum wage. And what are we seeing now? Well, admittedly, this is the Daily Wire, which is a conservative outlet, but they have the story predictable. Minimum wage increase in New York City leads to job losses, price increases. Yes, this is one of the predictable outcomes of a minimum wage increase when done completely improperly. Now, before we get started, I want to say one thing about the left, the right, liberal, conservative, whatever. I don't think it matters what you are tribally. That's ridiculous. Does a minimum wage make sense? Now, if you're in a tribe on the left, you'll say it does, and on the right, you'll say it doesn't. But the reality is it does sometimes and it doesn't sometimes. There are some instances where a minimum wage increase absolutely does make sense, but probably per sector, not blanket. I think there are some instances where a minimum wage can be applied appropriately, but there's so many factors that have to be taken into account. First, you can't just do a massive, dramatic jump from like $10 to $15 an hour. That's what, a 33% labor increase on every single business, which is going to transfer to products. That doesn't make sense. Incremental makes sense, in my opinion, but you have to be careful because then, $10, $15, how do I phrase this? $10 minimum wage becomes the new $15 minimum wage, etc. And that's your base price for labor. It's going to affect everything. So it's complicated. It is. And what ends up happening is you have people on the left who are just blanket like, oh yeah, we should just do 15, fight for 15. And I try and ask them like, well, hold on, let's talk about which sector, which industry. Wait staff, for instance, for the longest time had like a $2 minimum wage and relied on tips. And if you didn't tip, then they were pissed. Some people thought that was a really great thing. Some servers made a lot of money and some didn't. I would say, in my opinion, it makes sense absolutely to increase the minimum wage to at least like a base federal level or something like that. But what we end up seeing with this very, very rapid progressive push is devastating local businesses. Let's read a little bit of this, and I've got an anecdote for you. Recently, I've been talking to an accountant. Democrats continue to insist American cities should increase the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, even as the progressive cities that have done so have been a model for the job losses that will come as a result of the policy. The latest example comes from New York City, where an online survey from the New York City Hospitality Alliance, which represents NYC restaurants, found the wage increase has hurt restaurant workers who were supposed to be helped by the higher minimum wage. The New York Post reported last week that the survey found job losses due to the policy. Andrew Riggi, NYCHA's executive director, told the Post that in 2018, full-service restaurants recorded a 1.6% job loss, which is the first recorded annual loss in 2 decades. I also want to point out, I think they're referring directly in New York City to the $15 dramatic minimum wage. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it doesn't make sense. But I will say this. I've never been a fan of, if somebody wants to work, someone desperately needs work, they're told by a restaurant, they're told by a restaurant, you're going to get paid, $3 an hour. I think it makes sense to say, listen, minimum wage plus tips. That makes it actually more, valuable for the waitstaff. You're guaranteed at least some money. And yes, some of that cost will, I think tipping culture, in my opinion, is a really, really bad thing. Maybe that's a liberal position. I have no idea if that's liberal or not, because I know a lot of waitstaff who prefer tips because they make so much freaking money. But let's read on. The survey also found that nearly 1/3 of respondents planned to eliminate jobs, and a majority would raise prices due to the increased minimum wage, which took effect on December 31st, 2018. While the policy wasn't in effect when the actual job losses occurred, it was well known that it was coming, and so it is likely that restaurant owners reacted accordingly in preparation. Further, respondents to the online survey said they plan to continue cutting jobs and hours because of the policy. So, a few fair points. It may not necessarily be because of the wage increase, but it was indicated by people there that this was playing a role in that. So I think if we're seeing a 1.6% job loss, that's actually small, though it is the first recorded annual loss in 2 decades. I think it's probably because people are starting to hedge their bets. And I have an anecdote that is very anti-minimum wage. I'll read one more and then I'll tell you about it. A total of 76.5% of full-service restaurant respondents reduced employee hours, and 36% eliminated jobs in 2018, the Post reported of the survey. Also, 75% of limited service restaurant respondents reported that they will reduce employee hours, and 53% will eliminate jobs in 2019 as a result of the wage increases, according to the survey. A spokeswoman for Governor Andrew Cuomo defended the policies by falling back on the feel-good claim that they helped workers. If someone is making $10 an hour and you decide to do a rapid increase to 15 and the business can't shoulder that burden and fires them, you've just actually changed their wage from $10 to $0. I understand that for the left, a lot of these things just feel good. Wouldn't it be great if everyone could be rich? Wasn't it like there was some story, it may have been, I think, from South Africa, where a guy said, we're going to print more money, make everybody rich or something. It may have been fake. I don't know. But it was like a meme, a photo I saw. It's like, no, economics doesn't work that way. But let me tell you a story, because I just went to, I've been talking to an accountant for expanding Subverse and probably hiring people and just doing general expansion stuff. And after we finished all of the, business talk, shop talk, he said, he asked me about, what I did and politics. And he said that he was like a middle of the road guy who kind of, didn't really like Trump. Trump's a whole other thing. He says like, oh man, he was much more in favor of gun control, probably more in line with Democrats, though middle of the road guy. But here's what he said. He's got hundreds of clients as an accounting firm, and he's seeing exactly what's happening due to the rapid minimum wage increase. He said New Jersey is jumping from something like, $8.35 an hour statewide to $15 an hour. And what do you think happens with that dramatic increase? All of these businesses are now doubling their labor costs, and they can't afford it. Some of them are shutting down. Staff are having to work harder they're getting paid more, but the amount of work they have to do is doubling because the business can't afford to bring people on. It's making everyone work harder. It's costing jobs. It's creating a nightmare for a lot of businesses. Some businesses are just, we're done. We're going to take what we got and we're going to get out before we burn up any more money. And what he also said was, listen, when you do a dramatic wage increase of nearly 100% across the board, you have to realize there's employment tax, there's insurance, there's a bunch of other costs related to those staffers that go up with the tax. And people don't realize that you're not just saying it's another dollar, it could be another $2 or $3. So this has been really bad. So I think it's fair to point out that in some circumstances, if you did a really light minimum wage increase, most businesses would begrudgingly say something like, if it costs, $10 an hour to hire someone and the minimum wage increases to like $10.50, a lot of businesses would probably absorb that, and they'd be like, okay, what's our increase? It's a 5% increase on labor. That's pretty bad. We'll spread the cost out a little bit. But that's a gradual and incremental change. However, what's happening is they're jumping like 100%. And so I think one of the problems we have right now in our culture is the progressive left has run wild and there's no constraints. One of the reasons for this, I believe, is social media. You can't actually push back anymore. A lot of people have said that the way things should work is like the progressives go for these feel-good pie-in-the-sky policies and conservatives are holding them back slowly so they don't run off, drive off the cliff. Progressives they want everyone to feel good. They want everything to be great. So they're like, man, everyone deserves $15 an hour. But let me explain something. First of all, you can say that everyone deserves a living wage, fine. But you also have to recognize that in economics, the base unit of trade or energy is if everyone was paid that, there's going to be people who want more than that for what they're doing. People want more for their labor. So an example I'll use is like, say, apples. Let's say it takes 1 hour for an apple worker to produce let's say an apple worker can produce 10 apples per hour. We'll say widgets. A widget factory maker can produce 10 widgets per hour. The business then says, okay, I have to pay this person $8 an hour because a widget sells for $1 and they can produce 10. That gives me a profit of 2 widgets per hour. It's not a very good margin, 20%. It's not terrible, but it's not good. A good business is going to get like 50%. But okay, so now this guy's getting $8 per hour to make 10 widgets. But what happens? So then you have like a baker, and the baker is getting $15 an hour, which means he can buy 15 widgets per hour. What happens when you raise the cost of the labor for the widget production to $15? Well, now the guy says, okay, now I gotta sell widgets for double the price because otherwise I'm losing half my money. If a widget is worth $1 and I got to pay $15 an hour, but he can only produce 10 widgets, I've got to increase the cost of widgets. Now what happens is that baker, whose labor was worth more than the widget maker, has their net worth go down. And they say, whoa, I used to be able to buy 15 widgets an hour. Now I can only buy 7. I need a raise. So this is the problem with blanket, nationwide or statewide, direct and massive wage increases. Again, I think for the most part, it makes sense in certain sectors, not across the board. And you have to recognize that if you do a general minimum wage increase, the cost of literally everything goes up. Now, where this needs to be differentiated, and the important thing that, the positive, in my opinion, for minimum wage, as well as some interesting ideas I've been hearing with Andrew Yang and UBI, is that in an isolated community that produces its own goods, this is really bad. So look at it this way. A minimum wage increase for all labor across the board in New York State is going to have serious impacts in the local economy. But as it pertains to imported goods, it could theoretically be a good thing. So if in New York, every price goes up, all the prices for everything goes up, but in New Jersey, they don't. That means that the people who live in New York are now going to be generating more than the value of living in New Jersey. Basically, think about minimum wage in the United States, but then think about the cost of goods in foreign countries. So the cost of imports won't necessarily change because the labor in that country is going to stay around where it's at. And they're going to continue to sell to the US for whatever the import price is. It's much more complicated than this. I'm simplifying. The point I'm trying to make is minimum wages, in my opinion, sometimes make sense. And in some circumstances, I'm for them. But what I think we're seeing here with the fight for 15, because I've tried talking to a lot of these activists and just like, hey, break it down for me. Explain this to me. They don't. They just say everyone deserves a living wage. And I'm like, right, but listen. A living wage means that somebody is going to be getting, say, healthcare, an apartment, all of these things. That also means that the cost of those goods have to be at a certain level. If every base level employee is paid the same thing, then the cost of literally everything goes up. If you need someone to fix the door on your house, you have to pay at least 15. The cost doubled. So no, you are not giving someone a living wage by just jacking up the minimum wage. It doesn't do anything. But again, I think there's more interesting ramifications for the international markets, because if all of America's wages go up, but the people who are buying our goods overseas don't have their wages go up, that elevates, I don't know. I'm not an economist. So this is why I'm only center left, because I recognize that there's absolutely nuance in a ton of things, and I'm not the biggest proponent of a minimum wage increase for this reason. One of the reasons I really like Andrew Yang, who is also not for a minimum wage increase. He's got some really interesting ideas. He did a podcast with Ben Shapiro that was absolutely fascinating. Ben Shapiro pushed back, and it was incredible. I kid you not. You should really go check out the Andrew Yang Ben Shapiro debate. And full disclosure, a disclaimer for me and for you, I did donate to Andrew Yang. I think the more I listen to him, the more I'm really impressed. But the reason why the Ben Shapiro debate with Yang was so good is because Ben Shapiro pushed back a ton on Yang. And that's what I want to see. I don't think Yang has all the answers. I don't think Ben Shapiro has all the answers. I think someone like Andrew Yang or any other candidate think they know what will work and why, and they need to be forced to confront these challenges. I think Ben Shapiro threw some stuff at Yang that Yang didn't necessarily have the best answer for. And I think it's a really good thing, because then Yang's going to think about it and say, maybe Ben was right. Maybe I've got to, tweak this a little bit and maybe address these issues. But I was really impressed. I was really impressed with both of them. And then I think Ben on Rogan discussed this and talked about how he disagrees with them. I love it. I love the debate, because here's the thing. I don't care if you're a liberal or conservative. I care if your idea works, right? And so in some circumstances, I have seen benefits to minimum wages throughout my life. However, because of technology today, right, one of the things that Yang brings up, it doesn't make sense. You will speed up automation. Yes, we know businesses want to automate as quickly as possible, but you are forcing their hand and they'll do it quickly. You also have to consider the ramifications for local economics, and I feel like they don't do that because it just feels good, okay? And this is one of the big problems I have with the left. Now, I feel like in many circumstances, the right can be a bit callous, meaning as they're very individualistic, they'll say something like personal responsibility, you take care of your own, I take care of mine. And sometimes we do need social programs to help, guarantee things. And again, I'm not saying conservatives are opposed to these things. No, I've had in-depth conversations with many conservatives who are like, just limit them. My stance on these issues is pretty much like, I lean in favor of certain social programs and welfare programs. However, the issue isn't whether or not people should just be given welfare programs. It's whether or not the system is effective. We absolutely need a social safety net. I will defend that 100%. But our current system, in my opinion, is corrupt. It's bloated. It's mismanaged. And that's a serious problem. It really is. I like the idea of the, public versus private, the charity versus the government. But I don't know if the charity is the right is necessarily going to solve all the problems. And certainly a government on its own becomes bloated, corrupt, and then can't be fixed. It's one of the big problems. We need to make sure, one of the things I think is great about our current level of civilization is how, for one, capitalism has lifted everyone up. The poor people today live like kings relative to 100 years ago. But in the way I see it is, there's a few things that push me towards leaning left outside of tons of social issues. And it's that economies can destabilize and become corrupt through unchecked capitalism, like oligarchies can form. And then it's impossible for smaller businesses to actually compete. You get bullied around by big, massive corporations. And what we're seeing with tech giants actually suppressing conservative opinion is nightmarish to me. Because as I pointed out, one of the things I see with this, the minimum wage increase, is that the left is running wild because conservatives have no opportunity to push back because they're being purged from social media. Conservatives need to hold back the left from going crazy and essentially act as, and this is just one opinion on what the left and the right do in this country, but look at it this way. The left says, hey, we should increase wages. And the conservatives, basically pull them back and say, no, we're only going to give you a little bit. And then they make it, the left will get like an incremental gain in one direction, and it will be slightly good, slightly bad, but not too crazy, not destabilizing. This is destabilizing. This is what happens when conservatives have no chance to push back. And that's why I think, political balance is extremely important. It's kind of worrisome to me then when you see Vox, VOX, trying to shift the narrative, claiming that I or Dave Rubin are reactionary right-wingers, which is insane because we're not. But in my opinion, the reason they do this is because they're trying to forge a cultural narrative to make sure conservatives don't exist and centrists are conservatives, so they can shift the Overton window towards socialism, which will be complete and total economic collapse. I am a rather centrist individual. Capitalism is the system that we absolutely need. We do need regulations, but just because you have regulations that have failed, just because certain government programs have failed, doesn't mean the idea necessarily is wrong. It means it was done very, very poorly. It also means that when they're consistently done wrong, you need to check yourself and make sure you don't keep doing the same stupid mistake over and over again. One of the most annoying things to me is how the socialists effectively ruin the idea of social programs by constantly trying to claim they can just try socialism again. It's like, no, dude, stop. Okay? We can have social programs. We can have a social safety net. But there's a certain threshold where you go too far and everything just collapses. And if you don't check the corruption and you keep slapping bandages on festering wounds, you will get that corruption and collapse. Right? So when I talk about social programs, I talk about I don't want to get too much into the complicated nitty-gritty because, again, I'll be honest. My opinions on a lot of policy are not strong enough for me to go out and vote one way or another. I would never support minimum wage up or down because I just shrug and be like, man, I don't know. There's too many people you have to talk to, and the economy is extremely complicated, and I'm not an economist. So then you end up with people saying that centrists are people who are too stupid to form an opinion, and I'm like, listen, man, I understand you think you know, and you may have good reason to know, but the reality is everything I do is based on trying to know better and make sure my decisions are safe decisions. And unfortunately, things are just too damn complicated in a lot of ways. One thing that I've absolutely adamant on is the freedom of information, the right to self-expression, the right to debate, the free exchange of ideas. That's paramount. I know that. I know that because of history. When we look at minimum wages and stuff, though, I mean, the U.S. has functioned pretty well for several decades with the system it has, but this is what happens when you go too far to the left. Like I was saying, I'm slightly center left. I think minimum wages can work in some circumstances, and they have. You can argue it, but look, the U.S. has been pretty damn successful for a long time, And I would argue that we're doing pretty damn well right now economically. And so it's not like minimum wage destroyed everything. This, on the other hand, is a ridiculous increase. It's ridiculously high. We'll just leave it there. They go into Seattle and stuff, but, you know, I've been ranted for a while. Suffice it to say, I guess my final thought on the matter is, my God, how do you increase wage costs by 100% on small business in a state? That seems ridiculous. But one thing I will add is think about how that'll impact, you know, the cost of goods that are being shipped to New Jersey aren't going to go up in price. If New Jersey increases its minimum wage, the people who make apples in, you know, California or whatever aren't seeing that. That just means more people in New Jersey will be able to buy apples from a different jurisdiction. However, the local economy is going to take a massive hit because it's more, you know, isolated and insular. It's complicated though. Not an economist, and I hope you all recognize that. All I can say right now is what we're seeing is that the dramatic wage increase for $15 an hour was seemingly not a good thing. And if that's the case, then I have no point to argue against that. And all I can say right now is it's a hit for the idea of a minimum wage. There you go. What do you want me to say? I'm going to leave it there. Stick around. I'll have another video for you coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Adios.